The pink and gold balloons swayed gently in the afternoon breeze as I pulled into my sister's driveway. What should have been a celebration was about to become the most humiliating day of my life. Or so I thought. Because in exactly 3 hours, everything would change when a man in a dark suit would walk up to me and say words that would flip my entire world upside down. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Martinez family had always been complicated, but nothing prepared me for what happened at Isabella's baby shower that Saturday afternoon in Phoenix. As I stepped out of my beat-up Honda Civic, I could already hear the laughter spilling from the backyard of her pristine suburban home. The contrast between my car and the luxury vehicles lining the street wasn't lost on me. BMW SUVs, Mercedes sedans, and what looked like a brand new Tesla Model S. I adjusted my Target dress, the best I could afford on my retail salary, and grabbed the gift bag from my passenger seat. Inside was a handmade baby blanket I'd spent 3 weeks knitting during my breaks at the department store where I worked. It wasn't much, but it was made with love. Isabella's voice carried over the fence as I approached the gate. "Oh my God, did you see what happened to poor Emma last month? Still working at that little clothing store, living in that tiny apartment downtown. I keep telling her she needs to get her act together, but some people just don't have ambition." My stomach dropped. She was talking about me, to her friends, at her own baby shower. I paused at the gate, my hand frozen on the latch. Through the wooden slats, I could see about 20 women seated around elegantly decorated tables. Isabella sat in the center like a queen, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the sunlight, her maternity dress probably costing more than my monthly rent. "I mean, she's 28 years old," Isabella continued, gesturing with a crystal champagne flute filled with sparkling cider. "When I was her age, I already had my master's degree and was working at the law firm. Now look at me. Married to a successful surgeon, this beautiful home, and baby number 1 on the way." Her friend Sarah, whom I recognized from their college sorority photos, leaned in conspiratorially. "Didn't she drop out of college?" "Twice," Isabella laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "First time was nursing school, then she tried business management. Both times she just gave up. Now she's folding clothes for minimum wage and calling it finding herself." The other women made sympathetic clicking sounds, but I could hear the judgment underneath. These were Isabella's new friends from her upscale neighborhood, women who probably spent more on their monthly spa treatments than I made in a week. I should have left. Every fiber of my being told me to turn around, get back in my car, and drive home to my small but comfortable apartment. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was stubborn pride, or maybe it was the desperate hope that my sister would remember we used to be close before her life became a competition I never signed up for. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the gate. The conversation stopped abruptly when I walked into the backyard. Isabella's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, embarrassment, then something that looked almost like panic before settling into a forced smile. "Emma, you made it!" She stood up awkwardly, her hand automatically going to her 7-month belly. "Everyone, this is my sister Emma I was just telling you about." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt 20 pairs of eyes examining everything from my discount dress to my scuffed shoes. My cheeks burned, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Isabella. Congratulations on the baby." I held out the gift bag, trying to ignore how small and homemade it looked compared to the tower of professionally wrapped presents on the gift table. "Oh, how sweet," she said, barely glancing at it before setting it aside. "Emma works in retail," she announced to the group, as if that explained everything they needed to know about me. I found an empty chair at the edge of the group and tried to blend in, but Isabella wasn't done. As the afternoon progressed, she managed to work my failures into nearly every conversation. When someone complimented the beautiful decorations, Isabella mentioned how she had hired a professional party planner because some of us know how to invest in quality. When discussing baby names, she noted that she and her husband David were considering family names from people who've actually accomplished something meaningful. The final blow came during the gift opening. As Isabella unwrapped designer baby clothes, top-of-the-line strollers, and high-tech monitors, the oohs and ahs from her friends grew more enthusiastic. Then she reached for my gift. She pulled out the pale yellow blanket I'd knitted, holding it up with 2 fingers like it might contaminate her. "Oh, this is handmade. I made it myself," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the sudden silence.
"How crafty of you," Isabella said with a tight smile. "David and I have already ordered everything from the premium baby collection at Nordstrom, but I'm sure we can find a use for this somewhere." Sarah leaned over to whisper something in Isabella's ear, and both women giggled. The sound hit me like a physical blow. That's when I noticed the man standing by the fence. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of posture that suggested military training. He wore a simple navy polo and khakis, but something about him seemed different from the other suburban husbands milling around the edges of the party. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the crowd with an intensity that seemed out of place at a baby shower. What struck me most was that he was looking directly at me, not with the pitying glances I'd been getting from the other guests, but with what looked like recognition, which was impossible because I'd never seen him before in my life. Isabella had moved on to the next gift, a luxury baby carrier that cost more than my car payment, when the man started walking toward our group. His movement was deliberate, purposeful, cutting through the clusters of chattering women like he owned the place. He stopped directly behind my chair. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a note of authority that made several conversations pause. "Are you Emma Rodriguez?" Every head turned toward us. Isabella's face went white, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. The casual dismissal in her expression transformed into something I'd never seen before: fear. "Yes," I managed to say, my heart suddenly pounding. "Do I know you?" The man reached into his back pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. When he flipped it open, I saw a gold badge that made my breath catch in my throat. "Agent Mitchell Torres, FBI," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've been looking for you." The baby shower had gone completely silent. Even the children playing in the corner had stopped their games. Isabella was staring at me like I'd grown a second head, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I haven't done anything wrong." Agent Torres smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that put you at ease. "No mistake, Captain Rodriguez. We've been waiting for you to surface." "Captain?" The word hit the gathering like a bomb. Several women gasped audibly. Isabella's champagne glass slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the patio stones, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. "I think you have the wrong person," I whispered, but even as I said it, something deep in my memory was stirring, something I'd locked away in a mental vault, sealed behind layers of deliberate forgetfulness in retail routine. But Agent Torres's words were the key, and suddenly everything came flooding back.
The training facility in Virginia. The languages I spoke fluently: Russian, Serbian, Albanian. The months I'd spent in gray Eastern European cities, whose names I couldn't speak aloud even now. The operation that had gone sideways, in ways that still gave me nightmares. "I need to speak with you privately, Captain," Agent Torres continued, seemingly oblivious to the chaos his words had unleashed. Isabella's pristine baby shower had transformed into something that felt more like a crime scene, with 20 wealthy Phoenix housewives staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings. "Emma," Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. "What is he talking about? Military intelligence? You worked at Target after high school. You've never been in the military." That was the story we'd agreed on, the cover story that had let me disappear into civilian life after everything went wrong in Montenegro. My parents knew the truth, but we'd told everyone else that I'd moved to Phoenix for a job opportunity and had been working retail ever since. Simple, boring, unremarkable Emma, who couldn't stick with college and had never amounted to anything. It had been the perfect cover. Until now. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," Agent Torres said, his tone shifting into something more official. "This is a matter of national security." "National security?" Sarah squeaked from her chair. "Isabella, your sister is involved in national security?"
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Isabella looked like she might faint. The color had drained completely from her face, and she was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. There has to be some mistake. Emma stocks shelves at a department store. She lives in a studio apartment and drives a Honda with a dented bumper. "Appearances can be deceiving," Agent Torres replied smoothly. Then he looked directly at me. "Isn't that right, Captain?" The weight of 20 stares was crushing, but it was Isabella's expression that cut the deepest. For the first time in years, she was looking at me with something other than condescension. It was confusion, fear, and what might have been the beginning of respect. But I couldn't deal with that now. Not with Agent Torres standing there with his FBI badge, using a rank I'd thought was buried forever. "If this is about Montenegro," I started to say, then caught myself. The operation was still classified, even 3 years later. Even with Torres standing in my sister's backyard, I couldn't discuss details in public. "It's not about Montenegro," Torres said quietly, and I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "This is about something new, something that requires your particular skill set." He gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we could speak inside?" Isabella struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making her movements awkward. "Wait just a minute. This is my home, my baby shower, and that's my sister. I think I deserve to know what's going on here." Torres turned to her with the kind of polite smile that government agents probably practiced in the mirror. "Mrs. Castellanos, I understand your concern, but this is a classified matter that involves your sister's previous service to our country. I'm sure you can appreciate the need for discretion." "Previous service?" Isabella's voice cracked. "Emma never served our country. She's never done anything important in her entire life." The words hung in the air like a slap. Even after everything, the FBI agent, the revelation of my military rank, the mention of classified operations, Isabella still couldn't wrap her mind around the possibility that her failure of a sister might have accomplished something significant. It was Agent Torres who responded, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made several guests actually flinch. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Captain Rodriguez here has more confirmed kills than most Navy SEALs and has saved more American lives than you could count. She's received commendations from 3 different countries and has clearances that would make your husband's medical credentials look like a high school diploma. So I'd suggest adjusting your assessment." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear a neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down. Isabella's mouth was hanging open, and Sarah had actually dropped her phone. But it was David, Isabella's surgeon husband, who broke the spell. He had been standing near the grill with the other husbands, but now he stepped forward with the kind of clinical curiosity I recognized from doctors. "Confirmed kills? He means she's actually killed people?" "Dr. Castellanos," Torres replied without missing a beat, "your sister-in-law was one of our most effective intelligence operatives in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. The work she did prevented terrorist attacks on American soil and saved countless civilian lives." I watched Isabella process this information, her brain struggling to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the person Torres was describing. The sister who couldn't finish college, who worked for minimum wage, who never accomplished anything meaningful. "But she's so," Isabella started, then stopped. "Ordinary?" Torres supplied. "That was rather the point, ma'am. The best intelligence operatives are the ones no one suspects."
He turned back to me. Captain, we really do need to speak privately. The situation is time-sensitive. I nodded, finally finding my voice. Of course. As we started toward the house, Isabella grabbed my arm. Her touch was tentative, uncertain, completely different from the confident sister who'd been mocking me an hour earlier. Emma, is this real? Are you really? Were you really in the military? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. Behind the expensive makeup and designer clothes, I could see the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. The sister who used to braid friendship bracelets with me during long summer afternoons. Yeah, Bella, I said softly, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in 3 years. It's real.
Her eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung between us, loaded with years of misunderstanding and missed connections. How could I explain that I'd tried to be normal for her? That after everything I'd seen and done, I'd wanted to be the boring sister who worked retail and lived simply? That I'd thought ordinary was a gift? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said simply. Just like you didn't believe Agent Torres until he showed you his badge. The truth of that statement hit her like a physical blow. She released my arm and stepped back, her hand automatically going to her belly in a protective gesture. Agent Torres cleared his throat diplomatically. Ladies, I hate to interrupt, but we do have a pressing matter to discuss. As we walked toward the house, I could hear the explosion of whispered conversations behind us. 20 wealthy Phoenix housewives had just learned that the woman they'd been pitying and dismissing was apparently some kind of government secret agent. The gossip mill would be running at full capacity for months. But that wasn't my problem anymore, because as soon as Torres had said the words national security and time-sensitive, something inside me had switched on, something I'd thought was permanently turned off after Montenegro. The part of me that was Captain Emma Rodriguez was waking up after 3 years of hibernation. And despite everything that had happened, the years of hiding, the cover story, the careful construction of an ordinary life, I found myself curious about what the FBI wanted with a supposedly retired intelligence operative. As Torres held the sliding glass door open for me, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the surface. For just a moment, I didn't see the Target employee in the discount dress. I saw the woman who once infiltrated arms dealers in Belgrade and extracted American hostages from a compound in Albania. Whatever Torres was about to tell me, I had a feeling my quiet life in Phoenix was about to get very complicated. Isabella's kitchen was spotless. All granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Agent Torres moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking the windows and ensuring we had privacy before settling at the breakfast bar across from me. "How did you find me?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. My discharge papers were sealed. The whole operation was classified above top secret. Torres pulled out a tablet and swiped through several screens. "You've been on our radar for the past 6 months, Captain. Not because we were looking for you specifically, but because your particular combination of skills has become relevant again." He turned the tablet toward me, and I found myself looking at satellite imagery of what appeared to be a compound in a mountainous region. The architecture was distinctly Eastern European, all concrete and sharp angles against a backdrop of dense forest. "This facility is located in the Carpathian Mountains about 40 miles from the Romanian border," Torres explained. 3 weeks ago, it was supposed to be a defunct Soviet-era research station. Yesterday, our satellites detected significant activity. I studied the images, my training automatically cataloging details, vehicle patterns, defensive positions, the telltale signs of recent construction. "What kind of research?" I asked. "The kind that killed 8 million people between 1918 and 1920, Torres responded. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Biological weapons? More specifically, an engineered strain of H1N1 influenza that's been modified to be resistant to all known vaccines and treatments," Torres said, swiping to the next image, showing what looked like laboratory equipment being moved under heavy guard. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning to release it simultaneously in major population centers across North America and Western Europe."
I pushed back from the counter, my mind racing through the implications. A weaponized flu virus that couldn't be treated or prevented would spread like wildfire in today's interconnected world. It would make the COVID pandemic look like a minor inconvenience. Who's they? I asked, though I was already forming suspicions. A consortium of Eastern European criminal organizations with ties to several state actors who would benefit significantly from Western economic collapse. Torres's expression was grim. The same network you helped dismantle in Montenegro, Captain. The ones who've been rebuilding their operations for the past 3 years. Montenegro. The mission that had cost me everything. My career, my identity, my peace of mind. I'd thought we'd destroyed their operation completely, but apparently we'd only scattered them like cockroaches when the lights came on. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. I'm retired, discharged, I work retail, and drive a dented Honda. Remember?
Torres actually smiled at that. Captain, you speak 4 languages fluently, including Serbian and Albanian. You know their operational patterns better than anyone else in our agency. You've successfully infiltrated their networks before, and you have contacts in the region who trust you. Had contacts, I corrected, 3 years ago. People move on, loyalties shift. Some do. He swiped to another screen, and I found myself looking at a photograph of a man I'd hoped never to see again. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of cruel intelligence that made my skin crawl even through a digital image. Viktor Kozlov, I whispered. He's supposed to be dead. Reports of his death were greatly exaggerated, as it turns out. He's been orchestrating this entire operation from a base in the Balkans. And according to our intelligence, he's been asking questions about you specifically. The kitchen suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Viktor Kozlov had been the target of our Montenegro operation, the arms dealer whose network had been supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across 3 continents. He'd also been the man who'd ordered the execution of my entire intelligence team when our cover was blown. I was the only one who'd made it out alive. He knows I'm here? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Not your exact location, but he knows you're alive. Our sources suggest he's been using significant resources to track you down. Torres leaned forward, his expression intense. Captain, this isn't just about the biological weapon. This is personal for Kozlov. He's been waiting 3 years for a chance at revenge. Through the kitchen window, I could see the baby shower continuing in the backyard. Isabella was opening more presents, her guests gradually returning to their conversations about nursery themes and pediatrician recommendations. The normal world continuing its normal rhythms, completely unaware that somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains, a madman was preparing to unleash a plague. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. Torres pulled up a new file, this one showing detailed floor plans and security assessments. We need someone to get inside that facility and either destroy the bioweapon or gather enough intelligence for us to neutralize it remotely. Someone who understands Kozlov's organization, speaks the languages, and can blend in with the local population. Someone expendable, I added quietly. Someone uniquely qualified, he corrected. Captain, I won't lie to you. This is a high-risk operation with significant potential for casualties. But if we don't stop this, we're looking at a biological catastrophe that could kill millions of people. I stared at the tablet screen, my mind automatically running through infiltration scenarios and extraction routes. It was like riding a bicycle. The skills were still there, just waiting to be used again. But the cost... I can't, I said finally. I'm not that person anymore. I work retail, I live quietly, I knit baby blankets and watch Netflix and try not to think about the nightmares. Torres nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. I understand your reluctance, Captain. 3 years ago, you lost your entire team. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear. You have no idea what I lost, I snapped, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Those weren't just my team members. They were my friends, my family. And they died because I made a mistake. They died because Viktor Kozlov is a monster who kills anyone who threatens his operation, Torres replied firmly. Their deaths weren't your fault, Captain. But if you don't help us stop him now,
their sacrifice will have been meaningless. The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Chen, who taught me to pick locks and could make me laugh even in the darkest situations. Sarah Williams, who'd shared her grandmother's cookies during those long surveillance shifts. Tommy Rodriguez, no relation, despite the name, who was planning to propose to his girlfriend when we got back from Montenegro. All dead because of Viktor Kozlov. How long do I have to decide? I asked. The operation launches in 72 hours, with or without you, Captain, but our chances of success drop from about 60% to maybe 20% without your involvement. 20% odds against a biological weapon that could kill millions. The mathematics were stark and terrifying. There's something else, Torres continued. Kozlov has been monitoring the families of all surviving operatives from the Montenegro operation. That includes your parents in El Paso, your uncle's family in Denver, and... He gestured toward the window where Isabella was laughing at something one of her friends had said. Your sister and her husband here in Phoenix.
The blood drained from my face. You're saying he might target them? I'm saying he's a man who believes in comprehensive revenge, and he's had 3 years to plan this. Torres's expression was sympathetic but unwavering. If we don't stop him, Captain, everyone you care about becomes a potential target, not just from the bioweapon, but from his personal vendetta against you. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling on my shoulders. For 3 years, I'd convinced myself that ordinary life was enough, that being Emma the retail worker was a gift, a chance to be normal after years of violence and deception. But normal was a luxury I'd never really been allowed to have. When I opened my eyes, Torres was watching me with the patient expression of a man who knew he'd already won. If I do this, I said slowly, I want full operational control, no micromanaging from Langley, no political interference. I choose my own insertion method and extraction route. Torres smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him since he'd arrived at the baby shower. Welcome back, Captain Rodriguez. The baby shower was winding down when Torres and I returned to the backyard. Most of the guests had already left, their goodbyes hurried and awkward after the FBI agent's dramatic entrance. Only Isabella's closest friends remained, helping to stack presents and fold decorative tablecloths with the kind of nervous energy that comes from witnessing something far outside their suburban experience. Isabella herself sat in her chair like a queen who just discovered her kingdom was built on quicksand. She watched me approach with an expression I'd never seen before. Part fear, part curiosity, and something that might have been pride struggling to emerge from years of condescension. Emma, she said as Torres excused himself to make phone calls by his car, we need to talk. The remaining guests took the hint, gathering their purses and making hasty excuses about dinner preparations and children's bedtimes. Within minutes, it was just Isabella, David, and me in the suddenly quiet backyard. The pink and gold decorations looked garish in the late afternoon sun, remnants of a celebration that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. David, ever the physician, was the first to speak. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. I nodded, settling into the chair across from them. After 3 years of careful deception, the truth felt almost liberating. When that agent said you had confirmed kills, he was being literal, wasn't he? You've actually killed people. The question hung in the air between us. Isabella's hand went instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that cut deeper than any insult she had ever thrown at me. Yes, I said simply, I have. David leaned back in his chair, processing this information with clinical detachment. How many? David, Isabella warned, but I held up a hand. It's okay, Bella. He's a doctor. He understands that sometimes you have to make impossible choices to save lives. I met David's gaze directly. 17 confirmed kills over 3 years of operations. Arms dealers, human traffickers, terrorists. People who would have killed innocent civilians if they had lived. Isabella made a small gasp, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My God, Emma, all this time I thought you were... A failure, I finished for her. Yeah, I know. But why? The word burst out of her like a dam breaking. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just...
ordinary. I looked around the perfectly manicured backyard with its professional landscaping and expensive outdoor furniture. 3 years ago, when I'd first arrived in Phoenix with nothing but a duffel bag and a cover story, this world had seemed impossibly far from the blood and violence I'd left behind in Montenegro. Because I wanted to be ordinary, I said finally. After everything I'd seen and done, ordinary seemed like a gift. Working retail, living in a small apartment, knitting baby blankets, it was peaceful, safe. But we treated you like, Isabella's voice trailed off, like a disappointment, like someone who'd never accomplished anything meaningful. I kept my voice level, matter of fact. And maybe I needed that. Maybe I needed to believe that Emma Rodriguez, the retail worker, was more real than Captain Rodriguez, the intelligence operative. David shifted forward in his chair. What changed? Why are you going back now? I thought about Viktor Kozlov's photograph on Taurus's tablet, about the bioweapon being prepared in a mountain laboratory, about the millions of lives hanging in the balance. But mostly I thought about the threat to my family, including the sister who was carrying my future niece or nephew.
Because the man I helped stop 3 years ago isn't as dead as we thought he was, and he's planning something that could kill more people than every terrorist attack in history combined. Isabella's face went white. Are we in danger? The baby? Not if I stop him first. The words came out with more confidence than I felt. The truth was, going back into the field after 3 years of civilian life was terrifying. My reflexes might be slow, my instincts dulled by too many quiet nights watching television, but the alternative, letting Kozlov release his bioweapon while knowing I might have been able to prevent it, was unthinkable. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the patio. When he turned back, his expression was troubled. Emma, I've been a trauma surgeon for 15 years. I've seen what violence does to people, physically and psychologically. You said you retired 3 years ago. What happened? The question I'd been dreading. I looked at Isabella, wondering how much truth she could handle about her sister's real life. My team was compromised during an operation in Montenegro. 8 operatives went in. I was the only one who came out. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic and a neighbor's lawnmower. Isabella's face was white, her hand still pressed protectively against her belly. Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. All those times I said you'd never accomplish anything, never finish anything important. You didn't know, I said, though the words felt inadequate. That was the point. No one was supposed to know. David returned to his seat, his medical training helping him process trauma in ways that Isabella couldn't. Post-traumatic stress, among other things. The nightmare stopped about 6 months ago. The hypervigilance took longer. I managed a weak smile. Working retail actually helped with that. Hard to maintain combat alertness when you're folding sweaters 8 hours a day. And now they want you to go back, Isabella said, into that world, into danger. I nodded. The facility where Kozlov is developing his bioweapon is in the Carpathian Mountains. Getting inside will require someone who knows his operational patterns, speaks the local languages, and can blend in with the population. The FBI has other operatives, but none with my specific experience. What if you say no? What if you just refuse to go? Then they send someone else with the 20% chance of success instead of 60%, and if that person fails, Kozlov releases a weaponized flu virus that could kill millions of people. I paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle between us, including everyone in this backyard. Isabella stood up slowly, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. For a moment, I thought she was going to walk away, to retreat into her house and try to pretend this conversation had never happened. Instead, she moved to the chair next to mine and took my hand. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. More than an apology. I owe you years of respect and recognition that I never gave you. Bella! No, let me finish. Her grip on my hand tightened. All this time, I thought I was the successful one, the one who'd made something of herself.
I have a law degree, a successful husband, this beautiful house, a baby on the way, and I used all of that to make you feel small." She wiped away tears with her free hand. "But you were out there saving lives, protecting people like me who were too comfortable and sheltered to even know we needed protecting. And I made you feel like a failure for it. The cover story was my choice," I reminded her. "I wanted you to see me as ordinary Emma. It made it easier to believe in that version of myself." "But you should have seen through it," David interjected. "Looking back, there were signs. The way you always knew when someone was approaching from behind, how you could tell when people were lying, the fact that you speak perfect Spanish but claimed you learned it from mom and dad, even though they both speak English better than most native speakers." He was right. There had been signs, small tells that my training hadn't completely suppressed. But my family had been so invested in the idea of ordinary, unsuccessful Emma that they'd overlooked the inconsistencies. "What happens now?" Isabella asked. "When do you have to leave?" I glanced toward the driveway where Torres was still on his phone, probably coordinating logistics and extraction plans. "Soon. The mission launches in 72 hours, but I'll need time to prepare, brush up on languages, review intelligence files, get back into an operational mindset." "And after? When is it over?" The question I'd been avoiding. If I survived the mission, and that was a significant if, given Viktor Kozlov's personal interest in seeing me dead, what then? Could I return to my quiet life in Phoenix, folding clothes and knitting blankets? Or would Captain Rodriguez prove impossible to put back in her box?
I don't know, I admitted. I guess it depends on whether ordinary Emma or Captain Rodriguez wins the war that's about to start in my head. Torres was walking back toward us, his phone call apparently finished. Time for difficult goodbyes and preparations for an uncertain future. But for the first time in 3 years, Isabella was looking at me with something approaching admiration. And despite everything, the danger ahead, the impossible odds, the likelihood that I might not survive to see my niece or nephew, that felt like a victory worth fighting for. The FBI safe house in Scottsdale looked like every other beige stucco mansion in the gated community. Perfectly anonymous, aggressively normal. But the moment Torres led me through the front door, I knew we'd entered a different world entirely. The living room furniture had been replaced with tactical equipment, computer monitors, and a scale model of the Carpathian facility that looked detailed enough to use for surgical planning. "Welcome to your crash course in returning to operational status," Torres said, gesturing toward a woman in her 40s who was studying satellite imagery on a wall-mounted display. "Captain Rodriguez, meet Agent Lisa Chen, your mission coordinator." Chen turned around, and I immediately understood why Torres had chosen her for this operation. She had the kind of sharp intelligence that radiated from her eyes, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm enough to suggest significant physical training. "Captain Rodriguez, I've read your file. Impressive work in the Balkans before Montenegro went sideways." Her tone was professional, but I caught the underlying respect. "How are you feeling about diving back in?" "Like a surgeon who hasn't operated in 3 years being asked to perform brain surgery," I replied honestly. Chen laughed, the first genuine human response I'd gotten from anyone in the FBI so far. "Fair enough. The good news is that muscle memory is a real thing. The bad news is that Viktor Kozlov has spent 3 years upgrading his security protocols specifically to counter the tactics you used against him in Montenegro." She led me to the scale model, pointing out defensive positions and patrol routes with a laser pointer. The facility is built into the mountainside, using a network of natural caves that the Soviets expanded in the 1960s. 3 levels, administrative offices on top, laboratories in the middle, and what we believe is the bioweapon storage facility at the bottom. I studied the model, my mind automatically calculating approaches and escape routes. It was like flexing muscles I'd forgotten I had. The tactical analysis came flooding back despite the 3-year gap. "Guard rotations?" I asked. "Every 6 hours, but they use a randomized pattern that changes weekly. Kozlov learned from Montenegro, no more predictable schedules that can be exploited."
She switched to a different display, showing thermal imaging, 24-hour surveillance, motion sensors throughout the perimeter, and what appears to be a new addition since your last encounter with his organization. The thermal image showed something that made my blood run cold. Dogs. Lots of them. Moving in coordinated patterns around the facility. Attack dogs? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Worse. German shepherds trained specifically for tracking and takedown. Kozlov apparently decided that human guards have too many weaknesses. They get tired, distracted, sloppy. Dogs don't. Taurus joined us at the model, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing for several hours. Which brings us to the insertion method. We considered a high-altitude parachute drop, but the weather patterns in the Carpathians are too unpredictable. Helicopter insertion would be detected by their radar systems. So what's the plan? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I wouldn't like the answer. Chen smiled, but it wasn't the reassuring kind of smile. You're going to walk in the front door. The next 6 hours were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, and the kind of intensive preparation that brought back memories I tried hard to forget. Chen walked me through every aspect of the mission, the cover identity they had created, the contact network they had established in the nearest village, the extraction protocols if everything went according to plan. More importantly, she briefed me on the contingency plans if everything went wrong. Your cover is Anna Petrov, a freelance biochemist from Prague, with expertise in Soviet-era research facilities. Kozlov's organization has been recruiting specialists to help them understand the equipment they've recovered from the old laboratory. You're responding to a job posting they placed on the dark web 3 days ago. I flipped through the false documentation. University transcripts, employment history, even staged photographs of me at various academic conferences that had apparently been digitally created by the FBI's technical team.
This is impressive work, I admitted. But what makes you think Kozlov will buy it? He's been hunting me for 3 years. He knows what I look like. Which is why we're banking on the fact that people see what they expect to see, Taurus replied, joining us with another agent I hadn't met. Captain Rodriguez, this is Agent Marcus Webb, our disguise specialist. Webb looked like he belonged in Hollywood rather than the FBI, perfectly styled hair, designer clothing, and the kind of attention to aesthetic detail that suggested an artistic background. When he studied my face, I felt like a sculpture being evaluated by a master craftsman. Interesting bone structure, he mused, walking around me like I was a mannequin. The challenge isn't just changing your appearance, it's changing how you carry yourself. Captain Rodriguez moves like a soldier. Anna Petrov needs to move like an academic who's never held a weapon in her life. What followed was 3 hours of the most intensive acting coaching I'd ever experienced. Webb didn't just change my hair color and style, he taught me to alter my posture, my gait, even the way I held my hands when talking. By the time he was finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The key is believing in the character, he explained, as he applied subtle makeup that aged me by several years. Anna Petrov isn't a disguise you're wearing. She's a person you're becoming temporarily. Her mannerisms, her speech patterns, her personal history, all of it needs to feel real to you before it can fool anyone else. Chen interrupted with updates from the intelligence team. We've confirmed that Kozlov is actively recruiting for the project. 3 biochemists have been brought to the facility in the past 2 weeks, but none of them had the specific expertise in Soviet bioweapons research that Anna Petrov claims to have. What happened to the other recruits? The look that passed between Chen and Torres told me everything I needed to know. Kozlov doesn't believe in loose ends, Torres said quietly. Once the project is complete, anyone with knowledge of the bioweapon becomes a liability. So I'm walking into a situation where success means everyone dies anyway. I studied my transformed reflection, trying to reconcile Anna Petrov's scholarly appearance with the reality of what I was being asked to do. How exactly am I supposed to destroy a bioweapon laboratory without killing everyone inside, including myself? Chen pulled up a new display showing detailed schematics of the facility's ventilation system. The laboratory level has an independent air filtration system, standard protocol for biological research.
If you can introduce a specific chemical compound into that system, it will neutralize any biological agents without creating toxic fumes. She handed me a device that looked like a slightly oversized inhaler. This contains a binary chemical weapon, two harmless substances that become highly effective when mixed. Insert this into any air intake on the laboratory level, press the trigger, and you have approximately 15 minutes to evacuate before the entire level becomes uninhabitable. 15 minutes to get out of a facility crawling with guards and attack dogs while maintaining my cover as a harmless academic? Actually, that's where the plan gets interesting, Taurus interjected. You won't be maintaining cover during the escape. Once you've deployed the chemical weapon, Anna Petrov disappears forever. You'll be extracting as Captain Emma Rodriguez, and we're counting on that reputation to keep you alive long enough to reach the extraction point. I stared at him. You want me to reveal my true identity? To Viktor Kozlov? We want you to remind him why his organization has spent 3 years rebuilding instead of expanding, Chen replied. Kozlov may want you dead, Captain, but he also respects you as an adversary. That respect might buy you the time you need to escape. The plan was insane, risky, and dependent on too many variables to ever work in a rational world. But as I looked around the room at the agents who'd spent days preparing for this mission, I realized they were right about one thing. The alternative was worse. Somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains, Viktor Kozlov was preparing to unleash a biological weapon that could kill millions of people. And despite the risks, despite the odds, despite 3 years of trying to be someone else, I was probably the only person who could stop him. Anna Petrov might be a fiction, but Captain Emma Rodriguez was very real. And it was time for her to go back to work. The Carpathian Mountains loomed against the gray October sky like the backbone of some sleeping giant. I'd been hiking through dense pine forests for 3 hours, following a trail that wound steadily upward toward the facility that satellite imagery couldn't fully capture. The air was thin and sharp with the promise of early winter, and every breath reminded me that I was a long way from the Arizona desert. Anna Petrov's academic credentials had gotten me past the first checkpoint in the village below. 2 of Kozlov's recruiters had examined my fabricated research portfolio with the kind of desperate hope that suggested they had been having trouble finding qualified candidates. Now I was being escorted up the mountain by a guard who'd introduced himself only as Dmitri and hadn't spoken since we left the road.
The facility emerged from the mountainside like something from a Cold War thriller. Concrete and steel carved directly into the rock face, with narrow windows that looked more like gun slits than anything designed for natural light. The original Soviet architecture had been supplemented with modern security systems, cameras, motion detectors, and the chain-link fencing topped with razor wire that Chen had shown me in the briefings. But it was the dogs that made my blood run cold. At least a dozen German shepherds moved in coordinated patterns around the perimeter, their handlers barely visible in the shadows of the guard towers. These weren't pets or even ordinary guard dogs. They moved with the kind of disciplined precision that suggested extensive training in tracking and takedown. Dr. Petrov, Dmitri spoke for the first time in an hour, his English heavily accented but clear. You will surrender all electronic devices now, phones, tablets, anything with wireless capability. I handed over the phone and tablet that Webb had loaded with Anna Petrov's fabricated digital history, keeping my expression appropriately nervous. Academics weren't used to this level of security, and Anna would be intimidated by the military atmosphere. The director will see you shortly, Dmitri continued, leading me through a series of metal detectors and security checkpoints that would have impressed airport security. You will answer his questions honestly and completely. Dr. Kozlov does not tolerate deception. Dr. Kozlov. Even after 3 years, hearing that name spoken aloud made my hands want to reach for weapons I wasn't carrying. The man who'd ordered the execution of my team, who'd spent years building a criminal empire on the bones of Soviet-era research programs, was somewhere inside this facility. And in less than an hour, I'd be sitting across from him pretending to be someone else. The interior of the facility was exactly as Chen had described, administrative levels near the surface, then deeper laboratories carved into the mountain itself. But the briefings hadn't captured the smell.
Antiseptic and chemical preservatives mixed with the metallic tang of recycled air and something else, something organic that made my stomach turn. Dmitri led me through a maze of corridors that seemed designed to disorient visitors, past laboratories where technicians in hazmat suits worked with equipment I recognized from bioweapons training. Through reinforced glass windows, I caught glimpses of centrifuges, cell cultures, and what looked like industrial fermentation tanks. They were mass-producing something, and given the security protocols and containment procedures I was observing, it wasn't anything that belonged in a legitimate research facility. "Dr. Petrov," the voice came from behind me, smooth and cultured with just a hint of Eastern European accent. I turned around and found myself face-to-face with Viktor Kozlov for the first time in 3 years. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of cold intelligence that made my skin crawl. But there was something different about his eyes, a hint of madness that hadn't been there during our previous encounters. 3 years of planning revenge and developing bioweapons had apparently taken their toll. "Dr. Petrov," I replied, letting Anna Petrov's nervousness show in my voice. "Thank you for considering my application. Your research proposal was fascinating, if somewhat ambitious." "Ambitious. Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it. Please, join me in my office. We have much to discuss." His office was a study in contrasts, expensive furniture and artwork that belonged in a Moscow penthouse, surrounded by the utilitarian concrete walls of a Soviet bunker. Maps of major cities covered one wall, marked with colored pins and patterns I didn't want to think about too carefully. "Tell me, Dr. Petrov," Kozlov said, settling behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, "what do you know about the 1918 influenza pandemic?" Anna Petrov would have academic knowledge, but no real understanding of biological warfare applications. I let scholarly enthusiasm creep into my voice as I answered. "One of the most devastating pandemics in human history, estimated 50 to 100 million deaths worldwide, with mortality rates particularly high among healthy adults aged 20 to 40. "Precisely. And what made that particular strain so deadly?" "The cytokine storm response. The virus triggered an immune system overreaction that was actually more dangerous than the infection itself. The stronger your immune system, the more likely you were to die." Kozlov nodded approvingly. "You understand the mechanism. Excellent. Now, imagine if we could recreate that response in a modern context, but with certain improvements." He turned to a computer monitor and pulled up molecular diagrams that made my blood freeze. The genetic structures were clearly influenza-based, but they'd been modified with sequences I didn't recognize. "Vaccine resistance," Kozlov explained, noting my expression. "Every current influenza vaccine becomes useless against the strain. Treatment protocols fail because the antiviral medications can't bind to the proteins modified. And the incubation period has been extended to maximize transmission before symptoms appear." "That's," I paused, letting Anna's academic horror show through. "That's not research, Dr. Kozlov. That's biological warfare."
That's evolution, he corrected smoothly. The natural progression of scientific advancement applied to geopolitical realities. The Western powers have enjoyed their dominance for too long. It's time for a correction. He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the mountains with the expression of a man who saw himself as a visionary rather than a monster. Within 6 months, this facility will have produced enough of the modified virus to seed simultaneous outbreaks in 50 major cities across North America and Western Europe. The resulting pandemic will make COVID-19 look like a minor inconvenience. "And you want my help to achieve this," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "I want your expertise in Soviet-era containment protocols," Kozlov replied. "The original research from this facility was destroyed when the program ended, but the equipment remains. Your knowledge of historical bioweapons development will help us optimize our production methods." He was asking Anna Petrov to help him commit genocide. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man I'd spent 3 years trying to forget was recruiting me to assist in his own plan for mass destruction. "I'll need to examine the laboratory facilities," I said carefully, "and review your current safety protocols. Working with weaponized influenza requires very specific containment procedures." "Of course," Kozlov agreed. "Dmitri will escort you to the laboratory level. You'll have full access to our research data and production facilities." As we left his office, I palmed the chemical weapon device Chen had given me. 15 minutes after deployment, the entire laboratory level would be uninhabitable. But first, I had to get close enough to the ventilation system without alerting the guards. The laboratory level was a maze of interconnected rooms, each sealed behind multiple airlock doors and positive pressure systems. Through the observation windows, I could see technicians working with samples that glowed an eerie green under fluorescent lights. The smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger here, the organic scent of biological cultures mixed with industrial chemicals. "Impressive setup," I commented to Dmitri, noting the locations of air intakes and emergency protocols. "The containment systems look very thorough." "Dr. Kozlov learned from American mistakes," Dmitri replied proudly. "No accidents, no leaks, no contamination of personnel." Which was exactly what I was counting on. The same systems designed to keep the bioweapon contained would also trap the neutralizing agent I was about to release. I waited until Dmitri was distracted by a question from one of the technicians, then slipped into an equipment room that housed part of the ventilation system. The chemical device fit perfectly into the main air intake, and when I pressed the trigger, a barely audible hiss told me the binary agents were mixing. 15 minutes, maybe less. I stepped back into the corridor, where Dmitri was waiting with an expression I didn't like. Behind him stood 3 guards with automatic weapons, and at the far end of the hallway, Viktor Kozlov himself was approaching with the kind of smile that promised terrible things. Dr. Anna Petrov, or should I say Captain Emma Rodriguez? The game was up. Whether it was facial recognition software, a flaw in my cover identity, or simply Kozlov's paranoid nature, he'd seen through the deception, and I was trapped in a bioweapon laboratory with no backup and a chemical weapon that would start working in approximately 14 minutes. Time to stop being Anna Petrov and start being Captain Rodriguez again. "Hello, Victor," I said, dropping the academic accent and letting my real voice emerge. "Miss me?" His smile widened, but his eyes remained cold as winter in Siberia. "More than you could possibly imagine, Captain. We have so much catching up to do." The guards raised their weapons, but Kozlov held up a hand to stop them. "Not yet. First, I want to know how she got past our security. Then we'll discuss the various ways she's going to pay for Montenegro." 13 minutes. The neutralizing agent would be spreading through the ventilation system now, seeking out every biological sample and culture in the facility. But I was still surrounded by armed guards in an underground bunker, and Viktor Kozlov had been planning this conversation for 3 years. "You know what your problem is, Victor?" I said, calculating angles and distances. "You always were too interested in the dramatic gesture. If you just shot me when I walked in, you might have saved your bioweapon project." His expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing confidence. "What are you talking about?" 12 minutes. Time to create some chaos.
I dove toward the nearest guard, using techniques I'd learned in a different life to disarm him before his companions could react. The laboratory corridor erupted in gunfire and shouting, but I was already moving, using the maze of equipment and doorways to stay ahead of the bullets. Behind me, I could hear Viktor Kozlov screaming orders in 3 different languages. But it was too late for orders. The chemical weapon was doing its work, and in less than 10 minutes, his entire bioweapons program would be nothing but expensive, contaminated equipment. The extraction point was half a mile through mountain terrain, crawling with guards and attack dogs. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't Emma Rodriguez, the retail worker, or Anna Petrov, the academic. I was Captain Emma Rodriguez, and I had a job to finish. 6 months later, I stood in Isabella's hospital room, holding my newborn niece for the first time. The baby was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and her mother's eyes. Outside the window, Phoenix spread out under an Arizona sunset that painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Isabella asked quietly. "Taurus said you could go back to retail if you wanted, or take a consulting position with the FBI. I looked down at the baby, who was studying my face with the serious concentration that only newborns possess. In the past 6 months, I debriefed with every intelligence agency in Washington, testified before congressional committees, and received commendations from 3 different countries. But more importantly, I'd learned that ordinary didn't have to mean invisible, and that quiet heroism was still heroism. "I think I'll open a security consulting business," I said finally. "Help people protect the things that matter to them." Isabella smiled, the expression free of the condescension that had defined our relationship for so many years. "That sounds perfect." The baby made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a yawn. In her eyes, I could see the future, a world where people like Viktor Kozlov couldn't threaten innocent lives, where families could celebrate baby showers without worrying about bioweapons or international terrorists. It was a future worth fighting for, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to the fight.